Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. On June 28, 2023, local authorities in the Andover area received a call from a concerned resident. The caller expressed worry about his elderly neighbor who hadn't been seen outside for several days. The man was known for his routine lifestyle and regular interactions with neighbors, so his sudden absence was alarming. The front door remained closed, and he hadn't been out for his usual walks. Officers were dispatched to the location. After obtaining legal authorization, they forced entry into the residence. Upon entering, they were immediately met with a strong odor. The house, though lived in, appeared disorganized. Particular attention was drawn to the living room, where the man's body was found on the floor, partially covered by a white sheet. A fan had been left on, running at full speed and pointed directly at the body. The room's setup raised numerous questions. A powered-off cell phone was on the coffee table next to a charger. Handwritten notes, some containing aggressive or hostile phrases, were scattered across the floor. All of these were collected for further forensic analysis. There were no signs of forced entry or theft. Valuable belongings were left untouched. Near the body was a small dog, identified as a Pomeranian. The dog appeared calm and showed no visible signs of injury. In the kitchen, investigators found traces of what appeared to be the use of prohibited substances, used syringes, packaging, and remnants of unidentified materials. These items were carefully documented and sent for laboratory testing. No blood was found on the walls or furniture, but the condition of the body indicated that death had occurred several days prior. The state of decomposition and skin changes supported this timeline. The body's position and markings on the arms suggested a possible attempt at self-defense. As part of the preliminary investigation, detectives collected footage from surveillance cameras mounted on nearby homes. One recording captured an unidentified individual entering the residence about 5 days before the body was found. Later, the footage showed a woman leaving the home during daylight hours. At the time, her identity remained unknown. After she left, no one else was recorded entering the house. From the start, it was evident that this was not a case of natural passing. Several details, the body's position, the room's condition, the operating fan, the unusual notes, and the unattended dog, raised serious concerns. Authorities launched a full investigation. The deceased was identified as Stuart Crocker, a 62-year-old man who lived alone in a small home in Andover, which he had owned for several years. He was a retired British Army veteran receiving a military pension. Despite living alone, he maintained regular contact with his family, including his sons and daughters and former spouse. According to those close to him, Stuart was mild-mannered, calm, and always willing to help others. He had no history of conflicts with neighbors or relatives. Interviews soon revealed that a few weeks prior to his passing, Stuart had allowed a woman to stay with him. Family members were unaware of the full circumstances surrounding her arrival. He had briefly mentioned offering shelter to an acquaintance who had nowhere else to go. None of his relatives could recall her name, and no detailed information was available. According to his former spouse, Stuart described the arrangement as temporary assistance to someone in need and did not elaborate on their relationship. Neighbors confirmed seeing a young woman at the house, often accompanied by a dog, smoking on the porch. They noted an increase in noise levels, and while occasional shouting was heard, no specific incidents of aggressive behavior were recorded. Her actions seemed unusual. She would come and go at odd hours, return with shopping bags, frequently speak on the phone, and sometimes record herself on camera. During the investigation of the cell phone found at the scene, detectives uncovered an active TikTok account belonging to the woman who had been staying with Stuart Crocker in the final weeks of his life. The account featured dozens of videos posted throughout June 2023. Some of these videos were uploaded after the estimated date of Crocker's passing, and were clearly recorded inside the very room where his body would later be discovered. In one of the clips, the woman addressed her viewers directly, stating her name and announcing she was taking a break from posting. Accompanied by a casual smile, she ended the message with the phrase, "I've been a bad girl," behaving in a carefree manner as if nothing serious had happened. In another video, she mentioned being hungry and said she was heading out to buy groceries. The background clearly matched the setting where Crocker's body had been located. Location data and footage from neighborhood surveillance cameras confirmed she did, in fact, leave the house after recording. She went to a local chain grocery store where she purchased food and a leash for the small dog. A witness who encountered her at the store said she was speaking with a man she appeared to know. During their conversation, she stated that she would be famous soon, adding, "People are going to hear about me." Her demeanor was calm and relaxed. There were no signs of panic or an attempt to flee. In addition to the videos, the phone contained a series of messages, including drafts of letters addressed to a man named Steve, who was currently incarcerated. In these messages, she described the incident in detail, claiming responsibility for Crocker's death and stating she remained near the body while writing the text. She mentioned plans to write a book about her experience, expressing confidence that the story would bring her fame and financial gain. The tone of the messages was boastful, showing no signs of remorse or references to acting in self-defense. Investigators also found handwritten notes scattered throughout the home. Some contained hostile remarks directed at Crocker, while others were fragmented thoughts resembling personal reflections. A few entries indicated signs of premeditation. These materials, along with the letters, suggested deliberate actions rather than an impulsive or emotionally driven response. Particularly valuable to the investigation were video clips in which the woman appeared to be attempting to provoke Crocker into a conversation. She asked unrelated questions, seemingly trying to elicit specific responses from him. Crocker appeared confused in the footage, never showing aggression, and repeatedly said he didn't understand what was happening. None of the videos captured any signs of hostile behavior on his part. On social media, the woman frequently expressed affection for a small Pomeranian named Oblivion. The dog often appeared in her videos, and in captions, she stated she loved the animal more than people, calling it the only one you can trust. Clips featuring the dog continued to be posted even after Crocker's passing. This supported the theory that she had remained in the home for several days following the incident. Based on the collected evidence, investigators formed a preliminary picture of what had occurred. For several days after Crocker's death, the woman continued living in his home, using his belongings freely, and posting public content online. Winter Swanmiller was born on November 13, 1986, in the United Kingdom. She spent her early years in Derbyshire, a quiet region where she lived with her mother. Her mother worked hard to support the household, striving to provide a stable and calm environment despite limited financial means. Winter later described this period with fondness, saying her mother had been her main source of support and her closest connection. Her father was absent from her life until she was around 7 years old. When Winter turned 7, her biological father, who lived in Cornwall, quite a distance from their home, suddenly reappeared in her life. From that point on, he began taking her during school breaks. However, instead of the promised care, these visits became a source of emotional strain. He would make degrading comments, harshly criticizing her appearance and telling her she didn't meet his expectations. These remarks began to erode her self-esteem, planting early seeds of rejection and deep insecurity. In an attempt to gain her father's approval, Winter began altering her appearance, hoping to earn his acceptance, but his attitude remained unchanged. At the age of 12, a particularly distressing incident occurred. He forcibly shaved her head. This happened just before she started middle school and triggered a severe emotional breakdown. At school, she was met with ridicule, social pressure, and isolation. At the same time, signs of emotional distress began to surface. withdrawal, loss of interest in school, and a refusal to attend classes. Rather than offering support, her father made things worse, encouraging aggressive behavior, fueling conflicts, and reinforcing destructive beliefs. The most alarming episode came when he took her away without the mother's consent. For nearly 5 months, her whereabouts were unknown. When Winter returned, she was in an extremely fragile and depleted state. She later described experiencing interactions during that time that were clearly unacceptable and left her with lasting emotional scars. According to her account, her father's behavior suggested intentions that were deeply concerning and far from parental care. Although these claims were never formally documented, the psychological impact was undeniable. After she was reunited with her mother, all contact with the father was cut off. Still, the damage had already been done. Winter did not receive the necessary support from social services or educational systems. As a result of her experiences, she developed intense mistrust toward others, a constant sense of danger, and a defensive mindset, even in situations where no real threat existed. By adolescence, these patterns of emotional detachment, avoidance, and instability had become ingrained. At school, Winter was labeled a troubled teen, but behind her behavior was not hostility. It was a deep lack of emotional safety. The traumas she endured were never properly addressed, becoming the foundation for later instability that went unnoticed at the time. By the age of 15, Winter Swan Miller had completely disengaged from the formal education system. After repeated absences and escalating conflicts at school, she chose to end her studies. Her mother tried to fill the gaps by tutoring her at home, but by then, external influences had overtaken the family's efforts. Winter found herself in an environment where prohibited substances, inappropriate behavior, and relationships with significantly older individuals began to dominate. At 14, she became involved with a man more than a decade her senior. He was in his mid-20s. The relationship was marked by a clear imbalance of power. He exerted psychological pressure, dictated her daily decisions, and controlled her appearance. His remarks were demeaning, constantly pointing out her flaws and reinforcing the belief that she had to measure up. In this relationship, Winter mirrored the behavioral patterns she had learned in early childhood, seeking validation and adapting to imposed expectations. Rather than receiving support, she faced ongoing criticism and emotional isolation. To cope with growing internal tension, Winter increasingly relied on psychoactive substances. What began as occasional use soon turned into a regular habit and eventually developed into a dependency. Her attempts to break free from this cycle often led to relapses, further impacting her ability to manage daily life and maintain emotional control. During this time, Winter began switching partners frequently. These relationships were often transactional rather than emotional, exchanges involving housing, financial support, or shared substance use. This created a loop of instability that she was unable to escape. In 2009, at the age of 23, Winter faced legal action for the first time after being charged with causing bodily harm. The exact details of the incident were not made public, but the outcome was a non-custodial sentence. This marked the moment when aggressive behavior began to show as a recurring element in her life. The effects of substance use, a deteriorating mental state, and a growing tendency toward conflict only deepened her instability. At the same time, Winter developed unusual hobbies. She began collecting various types of bladed objects: brass knuckles, knives, decorative swords. Her collection grew steadily. The nature of the items, how they were displayed in her home, and how often she mentioned them in her private writings suggested more than just an aesthetic interest. These objects appeared to symbolize a need for control and a form of psychological defense. In the context of her overall behavior, this hobby raised concerns among the few people who still had contact with her. Winter's mental state during this period was notably unstable. There were mood swings, episodes of intense irritability, and sudden emotional breakdowns. Despite clear signs of psychological distress, she did not seek professional help. This decision stemmed from deep-seated mistrust of support systems and a belief that she could manage everything on her own. On one hand, this reflected a desire to maintain control, but on the other, it deprived her of access to meaningful assistance. By the time Winter approached her next life chapter, she was in a deeply vulnerable position, lacking stable relationships, regularly using substances, dealing with legal troubles, and becoming increasingly isolated and conflicted internally. Roughly a year after her first legal case, a brief period of relative stability emerged in Winter Swan Miller's life. It coincided with the start of a relationship with a woman named Natalie. According to acquaintances, this was the only known example of a long-term, stable partnership in Winter's background. Their relationship developed gradually, free from public turmoil or sudden shifts. Natalie was older, had a calm demeanor, and did not try to exert control. It appeared to be the first time Winter experienced emotional safety and genuine acceptance. With this newfound personal stability, Winter began exploring new paths. Initially, she worked as a veterinary assistant, later transitioning to pet care. Over time, she developed grooming skills and began offering dog grooming services. The job wasn't steady, but it gave her a sense of purpose and allowed her to earn a modest income, providing some level of financial independence. It was during this time that she adopted a dog of her own, a Pomeranian named Oblivion. Winter frequently shared photos and videos featuring the dog, often commenting that she trusted him more than people. Winter lived with Natalie for about 5 years. During that time, she stayed out of serious legal trouble, kept her social circle small, and rarely spoke about her past. According to former acquaintances, she seemed calmer, more reserved, and made a visible effort to stay within certain boundaries. However, her use of prohibited substances didn't fully stop. Though it was less frequent, it remained her way of coping with stress and anxiety. Everything changed after Natalie's sudden passing, caused by a rapid health decline. That loss became a major turning point for Winter. In a short span, she lost her grip on emotional regulation, returned to regular substance use, withdrew from others, and stopped trying to maintain her previous routines. In this state, she turned heavily to digital platforms, especially TikTok. Her content varied: short videos, dancing, lip syncs, appearances with her dog, and clips that often included provocative elements. Occasionally, she would share candid moments, personal reflections, emotional outbursts, requests for support, and comments about feeling alone. Her account quickly attracted thousands of followers. The attention, particularly from male viewers who left compliments and persistent messages, temporarily boosted her self-worth and gave her a sense of being noticed. She actively engaged with her audience and encouraged interaction. The platform became a place where Winter crafted an alternate persona, confident, vibrant, and bold, while in reality, she was spiraling into a deep internal crisis. As her dependency worsened, her posts became less consistent and increasingly disorganized. She began appearing on camera in loungewear, often showing visible signs of emotional fatigue. Concerned viewers left worried comments under these videos, but Winter typically didn't respond. Natalie's passing marked a point of no return. Losing the only person who had provided her with emotional grounding and having no external support, Winter gradually fell into a life dominated by chemical dependence and online performance. Outwardly, it may have seemed like she was trying to rebuild her life, but in truth, it was a way of escaping reality. It was during this time that she neared the events that would later draw widespread public attention. By early 2023, Winter Swan Miller was living in a state of social and psychological instability. She had no steady income, continued to use prohibited substances, and frequently spent nights in other people's homes. During this time, she met Stuart Crocker, an older man who lived alone in a house in Andover. Their paths crossed through a mutual acquaintance connected to informal circles involving substance users. According to those who knew him, Stewart was a trusting person with a generous heart. When Winter explained that she had lost her housing and cited threats from others as the reason she couldn't return, Stewart offered to let her stay at his place temporarily. Shortly after moving in, Winter brought her dog along. Stewart not only welcomed the animal, but also actively helped care for it. The first days of their shared living arrangement appeared calm. She cooked meals, made conversation, and took initiative with household tasks, all of which came across as signs of gratitude for being offered a place to stay. But before long, the dynamic began to shift. Winter started inserting herself into parts of Stewart's life that extended well beyond what had been agreed upon. At the same time, Stewart's communication with his family began to decline. His sons and former spouse grew increasingly concerned. They noticed his spending had increased significantly, and his regular contact with them had nearly stopped. When they expressed their worries, Stewart replied that he was simply helping someone who was going through a hard time. He didn't engage with their criticism. Attempts to speak with him directly were often intercepted or blocked by Winter herself. Over time, Winter took control of Stewart's finances and personal affairs. She handled paperwork for benefits, used his bank cards, and made purchases, many of which were for her own needs. These actions were framed as support and assistance, but in reality, they represented total control over his life. In the final weeks of Stewart Crocker's life, he had become completely dependent on someone he believed he could trust. During this period, there was no record of him displaying aggressive behavior or making threats. All significant actions with lasting consequences came from Winter, who, based on case materials, appeared to be laying the groundwork for what followed. In the early hours of June 23, 2023, events unfolded in Stewart Crocker's home that would lead to one of the most widely discussed criminal investigations in recent years. According to the investigation, that evening an argument broke out between Stewart and Winter Swan Miller. She later claimed that the dispute began because she believed Stewart had given her dog away to strangers. That claim was later proven false. The dog was found in the home, unharmed. After the verbal dispute, Winter escalated the situation dramatically. Forensic analysis revealed that she inflicted multiple wounds on Stewart using a bladed object. The injuries were concentrated on his back, chest, and neck. Defensive wounds were also found on his hands, suggesting he tried to protect himself. After the initial attack, when he could no longer resist, she used a handbag strap to restrict his airflow. The cause of death was determined to be a combination of blood loss and mechanical asphyxiation. Following the incident, Winter did not flee the scene. She covered Stewart's body with a white sheet, turned on a fan pointed directly at the area where he lay, and remained in the house for several more days. That same day, Winter invited a new acquaintance into the house. Despite the presence of Stewart's body, the two reportedly used prohibited substances together and recorded video footage. The following day, they left town and traveled to Birmingham, where they stayed in hiding for 5 days. Stewart Crocker's body was officially discovered on June 28, 2023, after a concerned neighbor reported his prolonged absence. On June 30th, Winter Swan Miller was taken into custody without resistance. The man who was with her at the time of her arrest was not involved in the crime itself. He was briefly held for questioning in connection with secondary charges related to the unauthorized use of Crocker's bank cards, but was released shortly thereafter. Winter was placed in detention. During interrogation, she refused to cooperate, answering every question with no comment. The investigation gathered extensive evidence, including surveillance footage, videos from Winter's TikTok account, handwritten notes, audio recordings, letters, and digital communications. Authorities concluded the act was premeditated. During the 2024 trial, prosecutors presented the full body of evidence. In a surprising move, the defense shifted its narrative. Winter claimed that she had been subjected to threats, manipulation, and violations of her personal boundaries by Stewart. However, these allegations were not supported by medical records or previous complaints. In her post-incident letters, there were no references to mistreatment. On the contrary, the tone was one of degradation toward the victim and self-justification. Videos recorded by Winter before the incident also contradicted her defense. Stewart Crocker appeared calm, showed no signs of aggression, and responded to her confrontational questions with confusion, clearly unaware of the accusations being implied. The court determined that Winter had acted deliberately, driven by personal gain and internal hostility. Winter Swan Miller was found guilty of intentionally causing death under aggravating circumstances. The court sentenced her to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after no less than 23 years. The sentencing statement emphasized the manipulative and calculated nature of her actions, rejecting any claims of self-defense. The court also noted that she had attempted to exploit the incident for personal publicity. The dog found at the scene was placed with a new family. According to animal welfare authorities, the pet has since adjusted well and is in a safe environment. Stewart Crocker's funeral was held privately with close family in attendance. His sons and former spouse gave heartfelt speeches, remembering him as kind, generous, and always willing to help others. They emphasized that his trusting nature was ultimately what led to the tragedy. The case drew widespread public attention, particularly due to the combination of social media, theatrics, the absence of remorse, and the calculated nature of the crime. The court delivered a clear verdict. Winter Swan Miller knowingly committed the offense, intending to use the aftermath as a tool to attract attention to herself. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.